Ryuga Gotoku's output is unprecedented. For a studio known for telling long, dramatic stories set in the Japanese underworld, its main series Like a Dragon releases more games in a year than some studios release in an entire generation. With Yakuza Like a Dragon, the 7th entry, the series saw an overhaul, transforming it into an RPG akin to Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. This is the story of how a last-minute change reinvented a 15-year-old series. How one April Fool's joke, one Japanese heartthrob, and 300 truant schoolchildren helped redefine an icon. This is the story of how Like a Dragon went turn-based. At the end of the Song of Life, Kiryu's time as the main protagonist of the Yakuza series, named Like a Dragon in Japan, had come to an end. What started out as the story of a heroic street thug adopting a lost child in Kamurocho grew into a multi-decade story told across Japan. When looking for Kiryu's replacement, the team at developer Ryuga Gotoku's earliest ideas didn't come from work on the 7th title dubbed internally as Shin Like a Dragon. Instead, series writer Masayoshi Yokoyama developed the character that would become Ichiban Kasuga for the mobile card battler RGG Online. Ichiban's origins, even that early on, were rooted in contrast to what the series had done before. Where Kiryu originally was inspired by the noble loner Yakuza hero seen in 1960s Japanese Ninkyo films, Ichiban was initially designed as a leader, even despite not being the Dragon Quest-obsessed character he'd become in the finished game. He was animated, complicated, and intended to be relatable first and foremost, and always seeing the best in people, whereas Kiryu felt more reserved. In August of 2017, a little less than a year after the release of The Song of Life, the team officially unveiled their plans for the future, with an announcement of RGG Online and a trailer showing Shin Like a Dragon was in development, featuring an early version of Ichiban fighting alongside Kiryu and Kamurocho. In this early showcase, a lot of Ichiban's origin is the same as it would be in the final game. He's still without a father, born in a Soplin brothel, and raised in an ironic take on It Takes a Village on the streets of Tokyo's red light district. What's interesting, however, is that a lot of this is still focused heavily on Kamurocho. While that could be a product of this being for RGG Online, despite being sort of a prequel and delving into his jail time at the opening of Like a Dragon, this, alongside his appearance with Kiryu, shows a version of the game that may not have gone to Yokohama at all. It's worth noting, though, that few studios have the turnaround of RGG Studio. In the Pandemic Software video, I discussed that I couldn't think of a studio that had a better run than them when they released Battlefront 2, Mercenaries Playground of Destruction, and Destroy All Humans in the span of 12 months. But for RGG, with spin-offs and remakes included, multiple games a year isn't necessarily uncommon. These games have a tendency to come together very quickly, due in part to reused assets, iterative design, and a team that grew together over the course of several games. Their thought process was a quick turnaround, allowed the team to implement feedback quicker, but also kept players in an expecting rhythm of releases. When looking at the future of the series, longtime creative director and real-life Like a Dragon character Toshihiro Nagoshi was at a loss on how to proceed. That iterative design felt like a bit of a double-edged sword. Between games, Nagoshi's intention was never to make things too complicated or difficult for their target audience of adult Japanese men who may not have the same amount of time to master a video game. There was, as he put it, a margin of progress as these games came out, designed to keep things interesting for longtime fans without overwhelming newcomers in an attempt to make sure players saw the end of the story. Half-jokingly, the team suggested that one way to keep things fresh was to make Shin Like a Dragon a JRPG. After all, the games kind of already were. Random encounters, long-running stories, and defined protagonists were already the norm. On the same side as Ichiban's story and character were developing, that sense of leadership and tendency to be less of a loner was making the idea of him having a party of companions feel more thematically appropriate. Story and character were always a priority for the team, and having gameplay act in service of those themes made an RPG the right choice. Meeting in the middle of that accessibility and need for reinvention, the team moved forward with their new gameplay style, choosing to show it off to the public in an unusual way. Complete with menu and impact noises straight out of Dragon Quest, this joke trailer features Ichiban and his party encountering a group of thugs in Kamurocho, showing off a first look at this new turn-based style. While only Ichiban and Seiko, here named Aika, are their finished models, Adachi and Nanba, here named Mirahama and Sakai respectively, are still their warrior and mage classes, with Sakai getting over-the-top versions of the alcohol-spewing magic spells we'd see later. All of it culminates in a boss battle with construction equipment and an early version of the scene where Ichiban pulls his holy sword from the pavement. In hindsight, the motivation for showing it off in this way feels a little fuzzy. While in interviews, Nagoshi would state that Yakuza 7 was still an action game at this point, and the team reshuffled development after the positive response to this trailer, Yokoyama in 2022 would comment that Nagoshi was obviously joking, reiterating that the change came from that desire to make Ichiban less of a loner and how the story was developing around a larger party of characters. That being said, these early interpretations of the characters and menus feels like an odd thing to do so close to officially showing the new style off to the public. It's a weird way to start their marketing push. Part of me can't shake the feeling that there's something more here. Possibly that this was an internal pitch video used early on to illustrate to Sega higher-ups what the team was planning to do with the series, and was reused in this April Fool's Day context. The changes, like Nanba's more athletic style being toned down, feel like the result of real iteration and development done to tighten up combat, likely based on focus testing and the game actually taking shape in this form, and not just to further a joke. It feels too elaborate and not far off from other pitch videos I've seen in the past. However, that's just my speculation. As a whole though, it shows a team that was enthusiastic about their new style and had a strong enough base in their engine to reinvent the series in this way. I think there's some truth in what Nagoshi stated in that interview.
In my experience, when you have to stop a brainstorm because too many ideas are flowing, you're on the right direction. That energy stands as proof. You must not miss that moment. Of course, these are only ideas that are not yet structured. The creative process gets tough from there, but this is needed to trigger things forward.
When moving forward with the turn-based combat, however, the team decided to make Ichiban obsessed with games to justify the change. However, to Nagoshi, it felt half-hearted to generically refer to RPGs and games as a whole instead of something specific. To him, it had to be Dragon Quest. It's hard to understate how big the release of Dragon Quest III was in Japan. Ichiban, being born in 1977, would have been the perfect age to be one of the 300 schoolchildren that were arrested for truancy on release day in 1988. To Nagoshi, a film student at Tokyo Zakai University at that time, Dragon Quest III was his first encounter with RPGs and changed the way he thought about games. Series director Yuji Horii was one of a very small handful of game creators players actually knew. When working on their new Like a Dragon game, Nagoshi reached out to Horii to see if they could refer to Dragon Quest specifically. With its colorful art style and cutesy monsters, it offered a childlike innocence to Ichiban's hardened outlaw background. Other series, most prominently Final Fantasy, didn't evoke the same feeling they wanted. Yuji Horii gladly accepted, later reflecting in Famitsu that he expected it to only be a couple of references. Nagoshi, in that same interview, mentions that if Horii or publisher Square Enix had declined, Ichiban, being a fan of video games, would have been cut altogether, which, to me at least, feels like it removes a core piece of his character. Part of what's interesting about this as well is that the series' switch to more turn-based is kind of the opposite of what other series have done in the past. Final Fantasy, being the obvious example, has gradually shifted to be more real-time over decades, first with active time battle and then fully real-time. Dragon Quest aside, Square's traditional turn-based offerings feel more niche and less like big AAA experiences. That's not a bad thing, necessarily, but it is interesting to see Like a Dragon commit in this way to something that's not as common as it once was. It reinforces that capital J Japanese game feeling RGG was targeting. Under the direction of longtime producer and name at the bottom of karaoke minigames Ryosuke Horii, no relation, Like a Dragon would officially be shown off in August of 2019. Expected in January the next year. Reactions weren't necessarily as positive as they could be. People were, rightfully so, skeptical that a long-running series like this could reinvent itself, despite being enthusiastic about the April Fool's video. Yokoyama would be among a few developers who would quickly get ahead of player skepticism. For one thing, he seems hesitant to call it a true turn-based experience, instead referring to it being a live command RPG where characters are constantly in motion, and, like with say Paper Mario, players can block or add damage to their special attacks with QuickTime events during turns. This to me is a huge part of Like a Dragon's appeal, maintaining the over-the-top feeling of Yakuza's real-time combat, and feels like an extension of its context-specific heat actions from previous games. It makes players feel like they always have something to do in battles, always have a fighting chance, striking that balance of accessibility without being overwhelming. Guarding as well came directly out of how players were interacting with the demo at Tokyo Game Show the following month, pointing to the real-time games having a dodge and how players would reflexively mash the X button when taking damage. When the game released as Yakuza Like a Dragon in the West, moving towards losing the Yakuza name and the number altogether, it quickly became clear that this was one of the best in the series. Taking well-worn RPG tropes and a party full of flawed, relatable everymen, RGG proved that the team was not only at the top of their game, but also die-hard RPG fans, Dragon Quest especially. Any number of references and mechanics are at play here. The job class popularized by Dragon Quest III perhaps most obviously, but also some that feel more subtle, like the melancholy journey through Kamurocho alongside Ichiban's father figure in its first hour that reminds me at least of the opening to Dragon Quest V. But at the same time, it still manages to feel like Yakuza, still full of karaoke, zany side stories, and older Japanese men looking grumpy in boardrooms. To a lot of people, especially in the West, this was their first impression of the series. It really captivated audiences on release. For me at least, it feels like a combination of my two most played games during the pandemic, Dragon Quest XI and Yakuza 0, both of which prompting me to begin research for an eventual trip to Japan and starting a nearly year-long streak in Lingo Deer that would, of course, be forgotten by the time I'd actually take that trip 5 years later.
Can you tell me how to get to the station? Go! Straight! And turn right! Go, go, go! Go your way! Believe yourself!
Like a Dragon is something special, carving a sort of meta take on RPGs in a contemporary setting that feels very reminiscent of Earthbound with its enemies that are monsterized versions of everyday people. Ichiban as well succeeds at being in contrast to Kiryu, often allowed to be more than just the straight man in a world that feels absurd. He still feels noble, but is comfortable leaning on and trusting his friends in a way that's very Shonen Jump. These aren't dumb kids though, and it's refreshing to play an RPG that isn't just teenagers going off to fight God or whatever. These are real people just trying to make ends meet. If you pressed me to criticize Like a Dragon, I might point out that it doesn't get truly great until you're about 10 hours in, which is all too common for JRPGs, and the live command system where characters are constantly moving feels like you have no control over positioning, even if you're being constantly rewarded and punished for it. Put simply though, Yakuza Like a Dragon gives the series a new energy, managing to reinvent a nearly 15-year-old series into something that feels truly unique. There was, however, a question when moving forward. What about those that loved RGG's real-time combat? After all, in the lead up to Ichiban's debut, Nagoshi and other producers were adamant that future games didn't necessarily have to be turn-based if that wasn't what fans wanted. A year before Like a Dragon hit store shelves, RGG released Judgment, a slightly different take on their signature style following Takayuki Yagami, a disgraced lawyer turned detective investigating a serial killer in Kamurocho. Judgment is neon and noir inspired, but also features one of the best interpretations of RGG's real-time combat we'd seen, complete with absurd heat action finishers, here instead named EX actions, and a more athletic style. Yagami is fun to play, and frankly, the coolest motherfucker I've ever seen, due in large part to him being played by Japanese musician, TV star, and 15-time Sexiest Man Alive winner Takuya Kimura. In 2021, a sequel, Lost Judgment, would be unveiled to the public, targeting a release by the end of the year, and naturally the conversation would turn to combat. In an interview with IGN, Nagoshi and producer Kazuki Hosokawa would state that Like a Dragon had been transformed into a turn-based series, and Judgment would be the real-time pillar going forward. To be honest, this really hasn't happened, and it's hard to pin down the exact reason. In the lead up to Lost Judgment, Kimura's representation, a talent agency, Johnny & Associates, didn't want the games to release on PC. They were notoriously strict with their clients' image and felt an open platform where Kimura could be modded to do any number of Fortnite dances or whatever wasn't in their best interest. Sega, however, saw the PC as a vital part of their player base, and it wasn't long before rumors circulated from Japanese publications that this impasse had stomped out the future of the series. At time of writing, no word has been given on Judgment 3, and the series hasn't become the action pillar it was supposed to be, despite both games launching on Steam a year later, implying at least some of the issues with the agency had been resolved. Around the time of Lost Judgment's release, however, Nagoshi would depart RGG, citing his role at Sega shifting to be more business-oriented and less about the day-to-day development of games. In 2021, he found his own company, simply named Nagoshi Studio, under NetEase, bringing along Hosokawa and a handful of others. Over at RGG, longtime writer and planner Yokoyama will be brought into the creative director role. In 2025, Nagoshi and team unveiled their own game, Gang of Dragon, which seems to be real-time and returns to Kabukicho, the real-life version of Kamurocho. While it seems larger in scale than an average Like a Dragon game, it's interesting to see Nagoshi and team return to form like this. Honestly, what likely happened is a combination of things. When both of these happened so close together, those who remained at RGG likely pivoted away from that two-pillar model and turned to getting back to a Like a Dragon core, with returning characters like Majima and Kiryu acting as the star of real-time spin-offs, with the latter getting a larger role in Infinite Wealth, and the turn-based ideas reserved for the tentpole numbered main games. It seems like the easiest way to maintain their quick turnaround while regaining their footing, by being slightly risk-averse and developing within their known strengths. Something is different about RGG, and the way the back half of 2025 went for them, it's hard to think if it's necessarily for the better. But I'm always at least a little curious to see how studios adapt after the departure of a big auteur figure like this. Like a Dragon has changed. They've passed the torch to a new protagonist, and they've entered a wholly new genre 15 years after their first game was released. But at the same time, the series still feels very similar. Still has that same heart and great stories, with odd, funny, and interesting characters it's synonymous with. It's not often such a dramatic change is done with this light of a touch. So as the series continues, it'll be interesting to see just how many of these new pieces it keeps and what returns. Despite the successful transition, I'll be watching the series with anticipation.